You won't live as long as this morning's guest company has been in business. And that's why you need to meet him. Coming up next on Carolina People. Good morning. Welcome to Carolina People. This morning we're at People's Underwriters in Carolina Forest. We're focused on the death care industry. And we're visiting with Jim Bowdre, the territory manager for Batesville Casket Company. Good morning, Jim.
Morning.
Thanks so much for coming back in. Yeah. I hope you all had a great Easter weekend.
Oh, fantastic.
Celebration.
Got to see my grandkids, and I still have two daughters and a sister, and her husband live here. And got to go to First United Methodist Church and had a great service. And
you've got two daughters who are here in Horry County?
And a sister and a brother-in-law that teach at Coastal Carolina, professors there, and then oldest daughter's a nurse down here.
Okay. And you have another daughter as well, Jim.
Middle daughter's in med school at USC.
Is that right?
She came down as well. So
good. She was here yesterday. Y'all had you are the father of three daughters, Jim.
All right. Don't you feel sorry for me?
Wow. One is a big deal, but three.
Yeah, I've been through one wedding. I've got two more to go.
Wow. That is tremendous. That is tremendous.
I started saving when I was 2 years old.
You're going to have to be saving a lot longer than that. My God. Yeah, you'll be paying that off for years to come. Yeah. That is exciting. Is Myrtle Beach home, Jim?
No, I live in Bennettsville, South Carolina. And
okay.
Stay down here, though, more than I do back home.
Is that right?
Because my wife is the development director for Mercy Hospice.
That's right. Carol is very active there at Mercy Hospice, and they're doing a great job.
Yeah, they stay real busy. Sister Connie Fahey is the interim director there.
Right.
And, she does a great job.
They just celebrated an anniversary recently.
25 years.
Is that right? Yeah.
She was the first. She started. Sister Connie started with the sisters. Actually started the Mercy Hospice.
Right.
My wife could do a lot better job.
Oh yeah. No, we're not here for Mercy Hospice, but still, I know they are really growing strong. And of course, she came down here full time from Bennettsville to commit to that. But even before that, she'd been active in some great groups in the PD.
Correct. With hospice back home and the PD Coalition
right.
for abuse, spousal abuse, for children and so forth. So she's been involved in fundraising and nonprofits for about 12 years now.
How did y'all end up in Bennettsville, Jim? Is that where Carol's from Fayetteville, right?
Yeah, she's from Fayetteville. I'm from Danville, Virginia.
Right, another ville.
Originally.
Yeah.
But Carol had lived there before I even knew her. And a friend of hers, doctor friend of hers, had a home there on the lake, and our oldest daughter was competing water skiing. So we moved there so we could water ski, so she could really, and then myself as well. But
amazing commitment. So one of your children is what prompted you all to move to Bennettsville, indirectly. I mean, to be able to
my
help.
wife wanted to move back there too. She loved she likes a small town atmosphere.
Sure.
And friendly people. I think that's why she likes Conway so much, because the people in Conway are very friendly and very warm and easy to get to know.
Oh yeah.
So and the folks I meet down at Myrtle Beach, same way.
Right.
It's a big town compared to Bennettsville, but it has a small town atmosphere. And you can find some restaurants to go out to eat at night. Pretty easily.
That's right. Not as many up on the lake.
Right. Yeah. You got hot dogs on the grill up there. But I limited choice.
You got to have the population centers to be able to justify having big, nice restaurants. Surely.
Yeah, we're close to Southern Pines, so we get to go there occasionally when we're spending weekends at home.
Right.
Which doesn't seem to be very often here of late, but.
Tonight is the grand opening of Ruth's Chris Steakhouse in Myrtle Beach. And to think about in mid-March of any year, to be able to have a restaurant like that opening up in Myrtle Beach, you've got to have the population centers for restaurants like Ruth's Chris, or of course the Market Common opening with its plethora of restaurants in early April. truly the Myrtle Beach area is just continuing to grow.
Unreal. I mean, like the area is just mushrooming here, the growth, and thank goodness the city fathers have prepared the roads to where they can handle it, and a lot better than what it used to be 10 years ago.
Oh yeah.
So that'll just perpetuate the growth cycle down here with retirees, and then people getting baby boomers more and more are retiring down here, which obviously will affect the growth and is continuing to affect the growth.
Absolutely,
of this area.
in multiple ways, and of course will impact the growth of funeral homes in the area as well. And speaking of getting on the road, you spend a little time on the road, Jim, as the territory manager for Batesville Casket Company.
Correct. I'm out like 3 to 4 days a week.
Is that right? Mm-hmm. Traveling is principally South Carolina or also North Carolina?
Parts of Georgia and a little bit of North Carolina.
Okay, sure, but mostly here in the Palmetto State. That's great. That's great. You've got, these would be virtually every funeral home then in the state or folks you call on.
Yeah, it's more or less the I-20 corridor east,
right,
from Augusta to Wilmington, through 76.
Sure.
To that area. So it's kind of, Myrtle Beach is more or less not quite the center point. Georgetown would be more like the center, but maybe, closer to Georgetown would be. But so I work out of the place I have here, and then my home back in Bennettsville.
What first got you interested in the after-death
death care industry?
Death care industry.
I was a school teacher in a small town. We were on the block, what they call the block system, which was 2-hour classes, taught a half a year instead of 1-hour classes the whole year. So, and then school started very early, so they could interchange the bus systems for elementary and senior high. And then I was a high school math teacher, so I was out by 12 o'clock most days, and starting at 7. But so I had the afternoons. And I started helping this local funeral director who had a farm, because I was raised on a farm.
Right.
And then first one thing led to another, started helping at the funeral home. This was around 71, 72, and then finished teaching school, went off to the Mortuary Science College, and the rest is history. I just went from the funeral teaching school to the funeral industry to Batesville in '81. So I've only had 3 jobs in my entire life since
the
coming
math
off the
teaching,
farm.
the funeral home, and Batesville.
In Batesville.
That is tremendous.
Most people have a lot more than 3 jobs.
Of course, yeah.
So I kind of stay put where once I decide.
81, that's almost 30 years, Jim, with Batesville. How long have they been around?
It's 123 years.
Is that right? Right. And they have a big presence in the Carolinas.
Correct, yeah.
Right.
Distribution centers in Orangeburg, and they have 92 distribution centers scattered throughout the U.S.
country
and Canada.
Right. Huh.
Plants scattered as well.
Batesville's a pretty sizable company. Are they also associated with the Hill-Rom?
Yeah, Hill-Rom Hospital Beds. That's a sister company, which is part of the Hillenbrand Industries.
Hillenbrand.
HI on the stock exchange. But,
right.
And Hill-Rom's closest plant to us here is in Charleston. So and then their main plants are in Batesville, Indiana.
Right, for both Batesville and Hill-Rom.
Casket and the hospital bed.
Do you get out there to Indiana much?
Occasionally.
To visit? Yeah.
I take customers out there occasionally when I'm fortunate enough to get the time to do it, and customers are fortunate enough to
be
get
able
the time off to do it, because they work 24/7. A lot of them do. So it's tough to get scheduled. To get. And I've had customers ready to go.
Oh yeah.
And then they get 3 or 4 death calls, and then we have to cancel flight plans. And
Jim.
So it gets to be. It can be a hassle sometimes.
I bet. We had gentleman Al Burleson from Southland National Insurance Company with us about 10 days ago, and hearing him talk about all the folks, much like you, dealing with clients in the Carolinas who you just never know. You really can't plan things too well. because you just never know, much like Rick Neal, who was with us last week on Thursday, talking about not knowing his schedules. Of course, he's not actively working in a funeral home at this point, but still hearing him talk about the schedules of the life of a funeral director can be a very...
It's very dedicated.
Right.
It's almost like the country doctor.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not a 8-hour shift deal, especially for the owners.
Right.
I went Steve McMillan's the other day, and Steve looked like he was beat, and he had been there since 2 o'clock that morning.
Is that right?
Preparing, embalming and preparing. And, of course, he's a great embalmer.
Oh yeah.
He was whipped. I mean,
right.
And I see that throughout. I remember I used to go to goldfinches sometimes for visitations because they're busy. So best time to catch them is either early in the morning or late at night.
Right.
And I used to see Mr. Hayward. I mean, when he was way up in his age, he'd still come right across the street. He wanted to be there for every visitation. Right. Even when his health, the average person wouldn't have done it, he was that dedicated.
That's great.
So
that's great.
He was very dedicated. And most customers I call on,
sure.
Way, they're
sure.
very dedicated professionals, and that's what keeps the business going.
Oh yeah, Jim.
You know.
Speaking of that level of professionalism, what is required of funeral directors as it relates to licensing requirements or training? What are they required to have? Is it different in South Carolina than most states, or all states? And who are the regulators there? Is that state or federal?
It's state,
right.
And it's regulated by the Funeral Service Board. And each state requirement started, I think, in South Carolina in '52, I believe.
Wow, that long ago, yeah.
As far as regulating licenses and so forth. But embalming started even before that in the 30s, where you could get an embalmer's license. You had to go to, at that time, embalming college was like a year long, or 13 months. Now
right.
It's a 2-year proposition with a 2-year apprenticeship.
I heard about that.
And it's kind of unusual. The embalming, the first embalmers in this country that started back in during the Civil War, were all medical doctors that were actually surgeons. And they called them surgeon embalmers.
Is that
so?
Right?
The only people that actually did embalming in the infancy of arterial embalming, the way it's done today, were actually physicians. And the contract, what was so funny is of course we studied this in college, but Dr. Thomas Holmes, that actually is considered the father of embalming, his surgeon staff was paid like $75 to embalm an officer, $50 to embalm an enlisted man back in 1861.
Wow, real big dollars. Yeah.
$75 in 1861 would be like $8,000 today.
Yeah.
But of course, in professional embalmers who actually had more education than the surgeon doctors did back then.
Right.
Because in medical school was only a 1-year deal back then.
At that time, is that right?
So, but anyway, I'd hate to. I mean, it averages $600 to $700 now for preparation, or
to properly embalm a body. Yeah.
So that's a big difference from what it used to be when it first started. Kind of like VCRs; they were $2,000, now they're about $100.
Yeah, you can even find a VCR. Yeah, they're so tough to find. With DVDs and other things having advanced so much. It's amazing. Yeah, DVDs are really all over. You know, you think about for you, and obviously the embalming process is a critical one, and that has to. Does that have to happen after all deaths, Jim, or is?
No, it's up to the family. The law that was put on the books that required embalming from public transportation purposes was actually put on the books in July of 1862. Wow. And what happened was, we at that time, we lost 664,000 roughly soldiers, and a battle would take place over a period of 2 or 3 days, and the United States, most of the war was fought, of course, on Southern soil.
Right.
And if a Union officer lost their life, the federal government would try to send them back for burial in their hometown.
Right.
And that's when we realized, that's when the government realized, because embalming wasn't done that prevalently at that time. And of course, with decomposition and so forth, and everybody that the bodies would go back on trains, and trains were also the only means of transportation for common carriers for average folks, you know.
Right.
So you can imagine the conditions that transpired with the odor and so forth, a lot of complaints. So Congress passed a law stating that in order for a body to be carried by a public carrier, it had to be embalmed. So, and that law is still on the books today.
Is that right?
But if you're and then some states have regulations where if a loved one, the family wants the loved one to be viewed, then if it's to be viewed, you know, after a day or so after death, and for public health protection, embalming is required. But other than that, you know, it's not. You know, a lot of the members of the Jewish faith, they aren't embalmed, because they're usually, you know, that ceremony normally takes place within 24 to 36 hours.
Right, very quickly.
So. But those are the regulations. And a lot of people say, what, embalming is such a negative to a lot of folks only because they don't know what it is. But basically, all embalming is the same thing that takes place with kidney dialysis. Same identical procedure, only in dialysis you just go into the axillary system, the venous and the carotid system, and displace the fluid, the body fluids.
So it's removing the bodily fluids.
And it's purified through a dialysis machine, and then it's re-entered back into the arterial system and drained out of the venous system. Same identical process takes place. Most embalmers go to the carotid area or internal jugular, which they are parallel venous systems of the body. And or you can go to the femoral, the bigger veins in the legs, femoral artery and vein, do the same thing. But you just inject into one and displace the body fluids, and you replace it with formaldehyde instead of arsenic, which was used at one time. And
is that right?
Arsenic was actually used up until 1912. Then it was outlawed, simply because a lot of people, the bodies that were embalmed with arsenic, buried in cemeteries, the arsenic was contaminating drowned or drinking water in towns. A lot of embalmers were actually dying from the arsenic being exposed to it. We lost several surgeons during the Civil War that were because of the harsh chemicals that were used, and that was the only thing that was available at the time. You know.
Of course, that process is relatively, I mean, you're not talking about a lot of cutting unless there's organ donation or other donation that goes on. But the embalmers have to be capable of doing both. If someone has lots of bodily parts that are being donated, that embalmer is the one who is oftentimes...
They're challenged with trying to create what's known as a memory picture, you know, putting back the loved one's remains as presentable as...
Right, so that families can actually view.
What it is, it's kind of a... I've talked to families through the years, and if what happens is the first step to healing after a loved one's died, the first step is to actually accept the fact that loved one has died. Psychologists say the easiest way to do that is actually view the remains, and it can be a painful process. It's kind of like going to the dentist. You can have an aching tooth, but you hate to go to the dentist.
Right.
But you have to go to the dentist to fix that aching tooth, and it's kind of like using a funeral professional, even though people don't like to go to funeral homes. But it's that's the first step of actually going to the funeral home to heal the fate, so that you can actually face the reality that your loved one has gone on. And the first time, and then what happens is by viewing the remains, it almost hits you. I've seen families just cry, break apart, and then they realize it. And then they're fine after that.
Right.
You know, I won't say they're fine after that, but I'm just saying it helps them heal, speeds up the healing process. And so there's benefit.
The numbness reduces and the feelings kind of come back.
And a lot of families still have that same procedure, whether they're cremated or whether they're burial. It's just instead of going to the cemetery, you just take the loved one's remains to the crematory, and basically everything else is following.
And funeral planning is so important there, Jim. Folks really need to go ahead and take that time to get in, oftentimes to pick out their casket or to pick out, you mentioned cremation, to pick out the urns or to think through that process. What are some of the benefits of funeral planning?
Well, the biggest benefit that families tell us is they actually relieves the burden of them having to do it. Right. Because they're still, in a lot of times, they're still faced with accepting the fact that a loved one has died.
Right.
The first stage of when you go through the death process is shock, and so a lot of times those families are still in that shocking stage, so to speak.
Yeah.
Especially like children that maybe a mother or a father died just suddenly.
Right.
And they're still in shock, and then they have to face the awesome responsibility of caring for the loved one's remains and arranging funeral, process and so forth. And pre-arrangements can obviously relieve that burden.
Right.
So there's a huge advantage there. A lot of times, funeral homes have very easy methods of letting the family pay for the pre-need. You can even take an insurance, policy out. And then a lot of times, if the way the insurance policies work, it's just a burial policy. And if the person, let's say, is making like a payment, monthly payments, and they happen to live a year or 2 years, and it was set up like on a 3 or a 5 year contract, then and the person unfortunately dies, then the funeral is paid for, even though they may not have only paid half of what the funeral bill was.
Sure.
So there are a lot of funeral directors have made it real easy, in other words, for families to make pre-arrangements. And of course, all of them that I call on, do that, and they're all good at doing it.
Absolutely.
And the funds, this is another thing too. The funds are monitored by a state agency.
Right.
So
carefully monitored.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So everything's in our industry is very heavily regulated, from how you price things to what you tell your families to disclosures of concerning embalming or whatever, warranties on products that they sell or that funeral professionals sell. Everything is regulated to a T and itemized, and families pick and choose and what they want or don't want.
Sure.
So it's and you look at the average cost of funeral. When I first got out of college, I bought a brand new automobile. I paid $2,100 for it.
Right.
That was in 1969. Okay, when I was in college, still in college. $2,100 for a brand new Mustang. Anyway, that car today, and funerals back then were about $1,800 to $2,000.
Right.
Well, today that $2,100 automobile is like $23,000.
Oh yeah.
But that funeral, and that's like tenfold,
Right.
But or not tenfold, but.
Yeah, it's about tenfold. That's right.
2,100,
22,000. Yeah.
So anyway, the funeral has not gone up anywhere near that. It's more like 4 or 5 times more than what it used to be.
Right. Right.
So inflation has not hit our industry like it has others.
And some of those traditional costs that families need to be thinking about as they're planning that out. What are the biggest costs there for the family as they plan that out, Jim?
Well, this was compliments of the federal government, and that's called where they made funeral homes go in and itemize everything and quote a service charge based on what their actual costs are.
Sure.
And they take what their accountant tells them what it costs them to put on a funeral. Of course, one of the largest federated in Florida helps do that. We help do it as well. And then, what's the average cost per funeral today is about $4,700 for a funeral home to put that funeral on. Actually, put it on, and they're supposed to spell it out. To a family, which they do, and itemize everything out and let the families pick and choose what they want.
You shared with us in early February the importance of itemization. I'm sorry we've run out of time. There's so many more questions we're going to have to get into another time, Jim. But one key thing is, what's the future of the funeral business look like today?
You don't want to say rosy because most people don't like to think about death, but it looks it's going to be a very bright future and a strong future.
Right.
simply because there's still a lot of dedicated, most of the funeral directors are very dedicated to their profession. They do a great job of serving the families that they serve.
Sure.
The fact that even though we're in what they call a flat death rate now, and I could talk 30 minutes as to why that's what's going on there, the history behind that dating back to the Depression era, but anyway, the fact that baby boomers, and there are like 75 million of us, myself included, will be unfortunately affecting the death rate in the next 4, 5, 6 years. And so it'll be, unfortunately, there'll be about 700,000 to 800,000 more deaths occurring each year, they're saying,
Right.
starting in about the next 5 or 6, 7 years.
Wow.
So there'll be an unfortunate need. I always tell people I'd love to go back to teaching school if I thought I could live forever,
Right.
I wouldn't even have to concern myself with the death care industry. But anyway, life goes on, and most of us live a good life. And fortunate to be here in the good old U.S. of A. So.
Absolutely, and that you are. Jim, sorry we've run out of time. Thanks so much for being with us this morning.
You bet.
Absolutely. Stay tuned to more Carolina People with Jim Bowdre, the Territory Manager of Batesville Casket Company, coming up next. You know, we had Jim in early last month. We ran out of time after almost 30 minutes. We had him back in again 7 weeks later, running out of time. There's still many more questions we wanted to get to. You can go online to learn more about Jim and his tremendous company, Batesville Casket Company, online at batesville.com. Batesville.com. Aren't there more questions you want to know? Take the time to learn more. There's a lot more to the after-death industry than what we got into just today. Go online, batesville.com. Thank you, Jim Bowdre, for being with us this morning. Absolutely.